Okay, today we're going to dive into tone, and we're going to look at value grouping and how we set up our values. We looked at a matrix, making those things clear, identifying line, mass, and form before, and now we're going to take it into breaking those areas of line, mass, and form into value groups. All right? The one thing that I'm going to do in the class is to bring up all the examples of a clear result. Those images that the artist's intention is fully displayed and how clear they displayed it. So, you know, and I've found approaching images and compositions, it's much easier to arrive at something if you define that for yourself ahead of time. If you haven't defined that for yourself ahead of time, then you have to grope your way through your image. And you have to kind of find it in the image. And we hear that often. A lot of times, you know, it's a search. It's, you know, your image, you're searching to find, you know, what it is in it. But, you know, a lot of that, if you can determine what it is what's your goal, it may change when you get in. And maybe when you get into your image and you're working with your composition, maybe you start to realize that, oh, this isn't working. There's something that you need to change. And if that's the case, you react to your drawing. But you want to start off with the clearest intention to begin with. And if you can start off with your clearest intention, then it'll send you down a path. And you'll make priorities. Because with all of our images, like these images that I have up on the screen, the one on the left is the actual image. I manipulated the one on the right to change it around just for this exercise. But the artist had something in mind when they were designing this and the composition. And this is about these characters hiding. Okay, so they're evading somebody. Clearly, the gentleman with his back against the wall is wounded or hurt or sickly or something. And then there's the woman, and then the guy who is helping them to hide. It's clear that's the case because the posture of the one guy leaning against the wall, it's a weakened posture. The woman is wary, and so is the guy. Now the guy is looking back. Okay, he's looking back out towards the outside of this tunnel or between the buildings or whatever. The important thing here is, if you can see the difference between the one on the left and one on the right, is that strong light shape on the wall. Without the light shape, they're just in an alley. Because you have a light shape on that wall, it is a strong diagonal and directional force in the composition. But it's also alluding to they're in the shadows. It's more clear that they're in the shadows in this image, isn't it? They're hiding in the shadows. If they were just in an alley, you might see it to the one on the right. But because there's a light source on that wall, you see this strong light shape, and it alludes that they're in the darkness because it's dangerous to be in the light. They're staying out of that light. They're not in the light shape. Now, if this was a movie and you did something like this, then you may have the other, who they're hiding from, may be able to appear as a shadow on that wall. So they're getting close. You could tell more about the story. You're building more tension in this composition, you know, or in this illustration. It allows you to build more tension. So having that idea, or in this case, story, is important. How much of this information do you need to know ahead of time, or how much of the design you need to know ahead of time? You should know all of it ahead of time, because what happens is through the execution of your work, you have to prioritize what's dominant and what's subordinate. If you don't know that, or if you haven't settled that in your own mind, if you haven't concluded that I want to say blank, if you aren't clear about what are the characteristics that make that, well, then you don't know how to prioritize those things. And then you're going to have to discover that along the way. Your best bet is to sit down and define it. That's why you do a preliminary sketch, is to get your clear thoughts together. Okay? So in the first image here, you can read into this, and you can see the original image on the left. The images are based in mass, and the image on the left has that strong form light. So that light shape only exists because the effect of light on that wall. If I didn't have that light on the wall, everything would be mass. The image on the right, everything is mass, okay? And very little depiction of form in there, okay? And when I say very little depiction, what I mean is the greater contrast, in the image on the right, the greater contrast is between the local values. Now you can see in the light areas, there is a range of light and dark on their clothing. The light areas on their clothing, there is a range of light and dark. And I'll draw that up here. Just within the So within this image, I'm going to see, I've got a strong dark. I'm just going to do a section of it here. I have this wall over here. Top of his head is coming up here. There's a light coming down here. And I'm looking at these silhouetted shapes. Okay. And you guys can draw along with me as I do this too. It's kind of a good practice to kind of just follow along with this. And so I'm just kind of depicting and I can see, in this area, he is giving some tonal contrast in here, saying there's a little bit of a reflected light bouncing up in this zone. But this still stays pretty dark. You see? So there's a little bit of tonal contrast within this zone, and we can see in his garment, which is all in shadow. So all of this is going to be in shadow to a certain degree. Or all of it's going to be in shadow, not to some degree, but totally. I'm going to put the dark silhouette of his coat in here so that we see that against his shirt. And that's what I want to kind of play this shape here, just so that we see this dark shape here. Now, I'll adjust my drawing and stuff like that as I go, and that might be, what you're thinking, how much do you need to know ahead of time? I will correct things along the way, and sometimes, sometimes it'll even get to the point where, if an idea isn't working, I'll go ahead and, rearrange what I'm doing to make the idea clear. Or maybe I change the idea, and then I have to rearrange a lot. So I'm just going to put this section in here like this. Now, within his shirt here, there is a little bit of areas that are a little lighter and a little darker. You see, I'm putting in a little bit of tonal contrast in there. Okay. But here's the key. This area in his shirt that I've depicted in there, okay, that zone is a light zone within this dark. All right. Now it can have a range of tonal value within here, within that zone. His face, on the other hand, okay, it has a tonal range within there as well, from over here to over here. The darker, real darks in here, and this in here. But this group is a value group. Okay, so we have one value group here, depicted here. We have another one depicted here. This is a separate value group. Okay, and his coat is really silhouetted, and this is just a really narrow range of a value group. Okay, so if I was to do this with three values, I might have a white, a black, and a gray. Okay, that would be my initial step. Now, one of the things that we're going to talk about today is value grouping. Okay, and we'll get into it, but I'm going to just draw a diagram really quick here, if I can. Okay, this is just, I'll just do a tonal range, okay, from white to black. And this week, we're going to be talking about tone and value and value ranges and creating a mood with these values, okay? So we have this tonal range from white to black. Now, we might think that to see a full valued image, you would have all your values. But for clarity, you want to eliminate values. And you want to look at value groups. Now, when I first started, first started painting and really interested in Sargent, I started reading about, this idea of no more than 5 or 7 values in my painting or drawing. And so I thought, oh, well, that makes sense. And so I thought about those values as a light value, a darker value, a darker value, a darker value, right? And a dark value. And I thought, okay, well, if they're using 5 values, well, I've set up 5 distinctly different values, and I'd start painting. And I realized I can't paint like they paint using this method. I couldn't get it. I read it, and I read that's what they did, but I couldn't achieve it. And it wasn't until later that I realized it really wasn't 5 or 7 value groups, values. It was 5 to 7 distinct value groups. It wasn't one value. It wasn't distinct values here. They were distinct value groups. For instance, this to this might be 1. If this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, these are 5 values. This is the difference between values and value groups. Value groups would be a range of values. Now, my next set might be somewhere in here to here. I'm doing this arbitrarily, but I'm just finding these areas. My next one might be a small gap, but it might be here to here. And my last one might be just hardly any perceivable difference. So this might be 5, 4, oops, I did 4, 2, 3, and 4. So I got 4 value groups here. Now, the key is eliminate these values. Eliminate those values. So within any image, I might have, like in this little diagram, I might have 4 distinct value ranges. They're not individual values. They're value ranges. That would explain how I could get this. This might be my value 2, for instance. This might be what I've depicted here as 2, and this might be 3. You see that? This would explain how you can get the variation within this, his shirt here, and the variation within his face. It allows me to use, say, this set of values for his shirt and this set of values for his face. But you see, having a gap in between makes the design distinctive. It gives you clarity in your composition. So it's really more about the in-betweens than it is about the individual values. It's what you leave out, and it's the narrow ranges that you create. Now you can set up with your tonal value range here from white to black. You can set up different arrangements for different compositions, and we'll take a look at that. And you're going to see something that's high key. Maybe within that image, there's not much dark at all. Maybe it's a snow scene, and maybe there's a house and a couple of bare trees out here. Some things going back in the distance. Maybe that's it. Or maybe this is a farm where there's just a little bit of crops that are... The question is, high key would be 1 and 2, and low key might be 3 and 4. With your tonal key, there's not just one key, there's 2 keys. And that's what we got to look at. This might be overall high key, like you had mentioned. Now, if I do something else, let me do another one, another image here. This one might be, let's just say it's a gondola, okay? And here's this gondola at night. And the gondola is on the Grand Canal at night. Maybe there's somebody in the gondola, a couple people in the gondola. And I'll turn it around, make the gondolier back here. How's that? So maybe I've got this, and this is all real dark. My gondolier is back here. Okay, something like this. And then I might say, well, I'm going to put a bridge over here and a canal here. Maybe there's another arch. I'll make a big, something like this. And maybe there's some lights back here. Maybe there's a light on the bridge here that's going to be in the water that picks up this light here. Right? So I'm going to have a light in the water. I want to get a strong light in the water. That would mean underneath here might be dark, right, under the bridge. But then we got this light lighting up this. Maybe there's a light on this side lighting this part of the bridge. We also get some light in the water there. I want to get that because I want to get light around the figures, keep them light over dark, and so on. Maybe this goes back in the distance like this. And this part of the bridge, maybe it goes dark under there. There's a little bit of moonlight on there. Maybe there's reflection on the ground or on the water here. And we get a bridge there. Okay, so this would be mostly dark, right? So we might say this is high key, And we might say there's a low key. Right? Now, the distinction here is this is usually what we learn and read about. This is high key and low key. But I'm going to give you some variations now. I'm going to give you a high key painting. Now, what if this high key painting had a building in it like this and these same snowy trees, surrounding the building like this, and maybe a couple distant trees like that? Maybe there was a truck out here, a dark truck. Maybe there was a rim light on this building from the sunlight breaking through. Now, what's the difference between this image and this image? Is this still high key? It's still high key, isn't it? Here's the difference. The proportion, the overall proportion, what we see here, your proportion is your major key. Okay, so our major key is your proportion. For instance, this would be overall light, right? And this one, I'm going to number them as 1, 2, and 3. Your major key in this first one would be mostly light, and it has a little bit of the trees, and it has some dark. This is 1. Number 2, and this would be high key, high major key. You have this. This is also high major key, right? Because the proportion, mostly light to this. The difference being the range of contrast, you see? So the difference between these two is the range of contrast. Is that clear? That is your minor key. Your minor key is your range of contrast. Okay? Your range of contrast. Now, that can change. And like it did here, the difference in the contrast changes your minor key. So this is a high major key, and it has high contrast. It's a high minor key. This is a high major key, but there's low contrast. There's not much contrast. Low doesn't always mean dark. Low means little. Okay? There's little contrast. So this would mean there's low contrast. So this would be, number 2 would be high major key and very low contrast or low minor key. So think of your minor key as your contrast, your range of contrast. That's very, very, very important. Okay? Now, if we look at the lower key image here, low major key, right? Because it's mostly dark, but then it has a good amount of, there's a little bit of white in there, real high contrast right in there. So that's a high contrast, wouldn't it? It would be a low major key and a high minor key. Now, if I wanted to change that, I knock down the lights and reduce the overall tonal contrast. Now what is it? It's a low major key and medium minor key. I just changed that tonal contrast. And that changed the mood of my picture. So these different, between your major key and your minor key, that's how you control the mood of your image. It's all managed pretty much right through there. Now, subject matter, people are subject to, are prone to like certain things or dislike certain things. That has a factor in whether someone's going to be like it or not, and that will have a factor in whether they think it's uplifting or not. Okay? You could have something with a tonal range that's not, that's just kind of more dreamlike, and it's got a cat in it, and the cat lover is going to look at it and go, oh, that's exciting. That's a real, intense thing. So subject is going to have some effect on this. At the same time, shapes will have a little bit of an effect in this too. Okay? But mostly, your tone will be It's your mood maker. It creates or determines your mood. Okay? Your tonal contrast. Now, a lot of times, I'll look at somebody's still life and they'll go, well, I wanted to paint this happy vase of flowers, and it's not feeling that way. Well, it's usually because their tonal range is off. Okay? It's not depicting something that is happy. Okay? That's their mood. So the question is, does the major and minor key apply to form and line? Yes. In our visual communication, major and minor key is how we measure. It's how we measure our components. We measure values. This is what we're talking about today, our tonal structure. We measure values, but we also measure shapes. We could say, I'm doing an image that's mostly triangles, but there's some other shapes involved as well. So the major key would be triangle shapes. The minor key would be the range between triangles and what that is. So that's how we would distinguish that. Color would be the same thing. We might say a major key is blue. If the greater proportion is blue, we'd say it's blue. Well, what other colors are involved? Is it an analogous scheme where the colors are similar? Well, that would be low minor key, low contrast of hue. If there's oranges and yellows and greens and blues and reds, then you have a greater contrast of separate colors. That would mean you would have a high minor key in color. So this is our method of measure. Your major and minor key is our method of measuring all of our visual components. Okay?